All right. Welcome everybody to the first initial episode of Gear Guys. Welcome my co-host. Go ahead.
Hey, I'm Brandon Flanagan.
Pleasure to meet you. And I'm sure the audience is pleasure to meet you as well. My name is Harrison Spencer, and let's talk about some cars and some marketing. You ready for this?
Yeah, I'm ready. Um, I think we start off at the top with generally what is marketing and how it relates to the auto industry. I think we got a lot of car enthusiasts listening here, and not a lot of people that are as enthusiastic about purchasing a car or getting into the ins and outs of the car buying process and the marketing that goes into that. But I do think it is an important thing to understand before you
Definitely.
walk into that dealership for the first time. So today we're going to dive into that a little bit, kind of explore what they want you to be looking for in a car, how they pick out their customers, and how you can go into the car buying experience to be a little bit better prepared.
Now,
So
speaking on marketing, to define marketing is really the wants and needs of the customer in that market group, identify the areas of potential creation in those gaps within the group, and essentially creating and demonstrating value for the brand or for the product. Now, on surface level, it's pretty obvious how cars relate to that, don't you think?
yeah, it's seems pretty self-explanatory, but it does go a lot deeper than that as well. I mean, marketing is a pretty broad term, and we could spend hours and hours going into all down all the different rabbit holes about it. But really, I mean, from creating, pricing, distributing, promoting goods, services, ideas, all that. And really, what it comes down to is just facilitating a quality exchange of, in this case, cars from customers who need cars and car dealers who want to get rid of them.
Now, to go in a little more into what my host is saying here, the wants and needs are very specific within a targeted market, and people who are buying a F-150 aren't going to be typically the same people buying a Ferrari. That's where they really break down into the marketing strategy. We'll go into that next here.
Yeah. So to kind of get into it, marketing strategy. Well, I think first it's important to differentiate marketing strategy and marketing tactics. So strategy is kind of your overall bird's eye view of segmenting, targeting, positioning is the major one, and then tactics is when you really get into the nitty gritty. We'll get into the seven P's and all that a little bit later in the pod, but yeah,
Exactly.
targeting. So yeah, marketing strategy to start off. Segmentation is going to be the first step in that. You want to talk a little bit about that, Harrison?
Yeah, I got you there. Now, segmentation, there's various aspects to segmentation, but some of the more clear ones that seem to emerge within the automotive industry are the demographic and overall behavioral factors. While the demographic and geographic somewhat go together in the car market, they're typically very defined. Oftentimes, people who are in the younger category want more power, and it can also be divided by where you are within the country if we're just talking about the United States. Most people, de- demographically speaking, on the West Coast have lower power per capita than they do over in the middle of the country. And why that is per se, no one knows exactly, but it's more towards the behavioral factors and what they need to do with them.
Yeah. I do think an interesting thing to bring up is with the demographic factors, like you were talking about. Generally, with age, the younger crowd wants more power, more performance in a car, and car companies certainly cater to that and market for that.
Mm-hmm.
But an interesting thing that pretty much everybody's aware of, and it's almost an inside joke at this point, is that the average age of a Corvette owner is 61 years old, which is just
It's
a
and it's
huge
entirely
anomaly for the
true.
car
I wish
business.
the stereotype was not, because I love me a Corvette, but I worked as a mechanic for a year, and the amount of Corvette owners that I come in with the Nike trainer shoes on, it's not a great look.
Yep.
The lawn mowing special. And so it just kind of brings down that demographic a bit, despite it being relatively cheap, high performance. I know the
Mhm.
current vehicle is on track to set pace, like with specs wise, of like a Ferrari. Even a track time is similar to its Ferrari competitor, yet being a third of the cost. I think it now
Great.
retails for like 65, 70,000 versus obviously 300-ish thousand for a Ferrari of that caliber.
Yeah, that's crazy to hear. I mean, they've always been impressive cars to me, and I'd love to have a Corvette.
Oh,
But yeah, it's
absolutely.
certainly become that midlife crisis car almost.
Right. You can see why it's so enticing to so many people. I think it's also that like when the Mustang when the Mustang was first produced back in 1964, in its first year, it was expected to sell about 100,000, but because they offered it at such a cheap price point with a decent amount of power within it, they sold over 400,000 units just that year. And by the second year, they've already sold their millionth unit.
Wow.
And it was one of the
That's crazy.
biggest sales in history of a certain model in that sort of time period.
Mhm. Yeah, and that was kind of a newer muscle cars are kind of a newer market at the time too. So I'm sure they didn't really know what they're getting into as far as
Exactly. They were
demand.
really just tapping into the oil there.
Right. And as we've seen throughout the last few decades, it was a pretty great decision there, huh?
Now, going on to what some of the marketers choose, like how to segment, we kind of touched on it with like the demographic, geographic factors. However, there's also certain characteristics about the products themselves that will entice people versus other markets. For example, some people view the Audi TT as a girly R8, even though it's a very well designed car. And the designer who had made it had done very successful work with other manufacturers. However, it's still, due to its small stature, has always kept that idea of it being somewhat of a girly car. And so something like that is how they would market towards or against when their targeted perception, because I'd imagine they don't want their vehicles to seem wimpy by any sort of means. And so when they see that, they want to expand away from it, target against it.
Yeah, I do think it's interesting how sometimes these companies will intentionally market towards a specific demographic or age group, finance level, any of that, and sometimes it just goes completely haywire and ends up in a different category. And that's interesting, and it's cool to see whether they just stick and run with it or if they double back and like in the in Audi situation try to kind of correct that image and go back towards their intended image.
Right, because you could see in later years that they had tried to add like more aggressive styling to it. And while it somewhat succeeded, it was hard to get rid of that previous image of it.
Right, right. Yeah, and sometimes you can just double down on that new image, even if it wasn't your intent, and there's plenty of market for it too. It's just
No, absolutely. It just really depends
calculating,
on the
making that
redesign.
decision. Mm.
And
So
then,
let's
well, let
touch
me
on
touch on
some of
one
the
more
other
thing.
segment. What was
One
that?
more thing for behavioral, because I think it's really interesting the amount of like cultist people within the automotive industry. Some people will never buy a different brand their entire life. And while that may not be only offer performance, it could also be an emotional tie that they have to this to create that brand loyalty. But also other factors in the behavioral would be something like specials to create that brand loyalty, like Toyotathon. Everyone's heard it. It's a running joke at this point. I mean, I know I'll crack that joke sometimes with my friends, and they kind of give me the look like, "Dude, really? It's Toyota." I'm like, "Come on, it's funny." But it's something that's kind of rooted in pop culture now, so it creates another sense of behavioral changes towards that brand.
Yeah, and I feel like almost like I do a fair amount of off-roading, a lot of hunting, and some of the guys I hunt with, got his first Chevy Silverado when he was 16, and for the just because of that, he'll be driving a Chevy for the rest of his life, and that's pretty
My point
crazy to think
exactly.
about. Like even you ask him, what do you love so much about Chevy, and can't even really give you a straight answer,
No,
even though
exactly.
a Ram or a GMC would do the exact same job. And that's where I feel like you almost see a transition from behavioral, buying something that's going to fit your needs, do the job that you're looking for it to do, to psychographic, and it almost becomes kind of an aspect of your personality.
So true. I know people who will go completely against big trucks. Like I'm not a huge fan because I like the Tacoma and that kind of area truck because I find them to be more useful, but that's because I live more in a city area versus somewhere where I would need to consistently, tow things.
Right, right.
And so
Yeah, and
you're
even
definitely right where that kind of becomes part of their personality. It's like, no, I'm a Tacoma guy. No, I'm a Silverado guy. And that's it.
yeah, it turns into heated debates and rivalries,
Exactly.
and it gets crazy. A lot of passion in the car industry for sure.
It's just like kids with
Um,
toys, man.
yeah, exactly. That's all it is. And then lastly, I mean, we briefly touched on geographic factors, but I did do a little bit of research onto this. I thought this was interesting. 30 states, mostly rural, kind of middle America, but even almost along the West Coast and certain random states on the East Coast you'd be kind of surprised by. But 30 states have either the Ford F Series, so the F-150, F-250, or the Chevy Silverado is the top selling vehicle, and it's almost an even split. And
Wow.
that's
I feel
pretty
like
crazy
that's
to
super
hear.
telling in the kind of people who buy it because they're actually so similar to each other, but they kind of refuse to cross that line, even though they know they're so similar to each other.
Yeah, exactly. It's interesting to see for sure. And then you get to states like California, and then they most popular or top selling car at the moment. I don't know if it's the most on the roads, but is Tesla Model Y, something like that. You can kind of expect. Um, but yeah, it's certainly interesting. That was an Edmunds article that I was reading, and it was cool to see what people are driving around the country.
Yeah,
There is a
it's
difference in
weird
certain regions.
because I think the main reason that obviously Teslas are going to be more applicable in places where you could have frequent charging. And so cities like California, or not cities, but states that have frequent cities are more suited for electric vehicles. Whereas if you're somewhere in Texas, it's a lot of area to cover. So if you don't have that charging frequently, it's not as suitable for the vehicle. And so I think that just goes to show the not only the psychographic where people are thinking differently about what they need to do day to day, but I also think that the geographic locations, some will have more incentive to use that kind of vehicle. I know even in California, you get tax breaks for using an electric vehicle. You get to use the HOV lane. It's just a single rider for an electric vehicle. So they're giving plenty of incentives. So it really kind of shows the duality between the buyers in the North American market.
Yeah, certainly. It goes from, cultural differences in geographic areas to actual convenience and cost too. Like even a state like California, obviously more suited for electric vehicles, but then you look at like the gas prices there compared to other places, and all of a sudden certain types of cars and not the F-150 start to seem a
Oh
little bit
yeah.
more appealing.
I remember, I want to say it was 2 years ago. I went back, and that was the first time I'd ever seen a seven as the first number. I had crossed through the border, and the first thing I see is the gas price is like 760 or something.
Yeah.
My jaw dropped. I didn't know what to do because I was coming from Arizona, and when we'd first gotten here freshman year, I know gas was like 285. It was nothing. It was like, especially for the time, California was like $5, so it was almost half price, and now it's like $5 here and still somewhat similar in California. So it's been very up and down, really, without much explanation.
Yeah, and unfortunately, I think that's something that the a lot of these car companies can't really plan for or market
You
towards.
know?
It's just so unpredictable, and even just a couple years ago, we were paying about half the price we were for gas, and I think that's something people got to ride with. People who like cars that guzzle gas usually are just going to be willing to eat it up, but I think we are going to start seeing a change towards more fuel efficient cars, especially as electric vehicles get more and more capable too.
Yeah, I mean, it was weird too because there was a time during that of the like post-pandemic kind of comeback where people were truly believing that we might have another oil crisis like we had in 1973. There was a lot of manufacturers in the 60s that were going with the muscle car style in the US. And so honestly, it was a direct reaction to the Mustang sales in the 64 year. And so they all saw the market for that, like, oh, we got to get on that. So all of these Mopars and Dodges out of Detroit were packing 5 liter engines. But as soon as the gas crisis, these vehicles were basically useless. People were actually abandoning them on the side of the road because they just couldn't drive them anymore. And so there was a point in time where we thought that was coming back. So the this is where we kind of go into targeting, where people are now so conscious of the miles per gallon and other aspects of the vehicle apart from the performance itself, which used to be the main selling factor back then. So like now the modern targeting has so many different aspects that you can cater to each different one, but it's hard to cater to all of them.
Yeah, and that kind of ties into moving from segmenting to targeting. It's real easy to segment, and in the car industry, it's pretty obvious in a lot of cases what the easily available, easily targetable segments are. But then choosing which ones to target is a whole different market there, right? And some are going to be a lot more profitable than others. It's just something to really consider, and we'll move into that here. But
So I think we've pretty much established the segmenting at this point. Let's move on into targeting here. So targeting, to be defined in the marketing terms, is basically how the segments are actually differentiated. And once you had identified the segments, you have to see what are the main goals and what really are the main priorities of each of these segments that you've identified. Anything I missed there, you think?
no, I think that pretty much covers it, and whole different types of ways to target each individual segment. And certain companies are going to be more inclined for other, and that we'll get into positioning as well. That's a big part of that. But yeah, there's all different types of ways to target. You can go from just mass marketing, getting the word out to everybody, and kind of let people target on their own. That's obviously not as cost efficient, but if you're, especially with like a newer brand, it's easy to get the word out with a high cost. And then you start getting into that differentiated marketing where you're not gonna put a Ford dealership in the middle of New York City or in downtown LA for filled with the lot filled with trucks only, right? It just doesn't make too
Your
much sense.
audience kind of thing.
Right, exactly. You know your audience, you know your market, and that's one of the most important things I think in marketing as a whole, but specifically in the auto industry is knowing your target market and always keeping that kind of in the forefront, knowing who you need to sell to, because you could have the best product in the world, but if nobody's interested in that type of product at all in the area that you're marketing or in the culture that you're marketing to, it's going to be a flop product. And
Mhm.
I'm sure we've seen that several times throughout auto history.
And I feel like one of the examples that comes to mind immediately is the Ozark. It was a Mitsubishi at the time, and it was supposed to be an all-terrain sort of vehicle, except they had tried to do everything at once. And so they ended up creating a vehicle that's lived in infamy ever since its creation because it had a tent in it, but it was so ugly. No one had ever bought it. So within like the first few years, it depreciated already more than half the price for some brand new vehicles.
Yeah, and that's a prime example of just not knowing your audience, right?
Or
And
trying too much. Sometimes a little goes a long way.
mm-hmm. Yep.
Now, to go on further, like how they choose their target market, I feel like different buyers or different personalities within the auto industry is really where you start deciding what kind of marketing will be most effective. Honestly, for consumers that just drive day to day with a regular sedan, like a Camry or a Civic, mass marketing is always a pretty good option. It doesn't need to be specific because it's one of the most non-specific vehicles to buy, to be frank, honestly. Like every company has essentially created one of their own, whether that's
Right.
Ford, whether that's Chevy. Everyone's created a mid-sized sedan, so it's not really something to be all hyped about. Where the other marketing comes in, like the micro marketing, is when you start getting into niche categories, whether that be hyper luxury, hyper performance, or just longevity. Some people want literal monster trucks. You're not going to market that to people just throughout the states. It's not worth the money. because those kind of people will find you. So most
Right.
marketing, especially in the auto industry, is done by their own interest. They're searching people out, and your job as a marketer after that is to make them feel like they had made the right decision.
Right. Yeah, that's certainly a niche market when you start getting into that luxury and this very expensive performance cars and all that. I do think an interesting thing about the auto industry that we really don't see in other markets quite as much is micro marketing is generally when you get in general marketing terms, micro marketing is when it gets to that one-on-one level, which for your Toyota Corolla of any other industry, there's generally not too much micro marketing going
Right.
on. If you're going to get a burger at McDonald's, you're not getting that one-on-one service like you'd get at a five-star restaurant, right? But when you go into a dealership and you're looking for a new car, you kind of in most cases will get that micro marketing where you get
Mhm.
one-on-one with the salesman. That's just because it's a larger purchase, regardless of any car is going to be a large purchase, right?
Right.
And that's kind of that's where people can really get sold. Like I've certainly walked into a dealership wanting one thing, and once those guys work their magic on you, talk you up for an hour
They're
or
good at what
two,
they do.
you start to consider some other options, right? And
Exactly.
we'll get into that with the marketing tactics too in a bit, but that's certainly an interesting thing that we don't see in a whole lot of other industries that is very prevalent in car sales.
And going back to the dealership, it actually reminded me the one I'd say frequent micro marketing you get that it's digital is with classic car sales because a lot of those people are connected to one another since it's relatively a small group of sellers. And so once a customer has bought from one of those sellers, these sellers will often talk with one another and try to market that buyer other vehicles that might be in their interest. And that's very targeted, very specific, because not many people are going out and buying perfectly restored classic vehicles.
Right, right.
So you kind of need that niche or micro marketing.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And I think that's kind of the like home sales is one car, a car and a home is probably the biggest purchase you're making for most average people. And home sales are the same thing, like micro marketing, just because you're spending tens of thousands of dollars or in a home situation, hundreds of thousands. So even if it's, the worst home on the block or in the worst neighborhood, you're still going to get that one-on-one where it's really trying to push you towards that sale, right?
Because a lot of those sales are done purely based off of relationships. If people like, I know this to be somewhat true because I've talked to some car collectors when I was working as a mechanic. He said a lot of the times, if he doesn't like the seller, or if he doesn't know who had owned it originally, he's not likely to buy it. He wants to know that that thing has been treated well throughout its history and not that it just looks now, like looks good now. Sorry.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I think that kind of gives everyone hopefully a good idea on what targeting is, how they use it. Let me ask you this: do you have an example? What's like the best example that pops into your head when you think throughout car history of successful targeting and a successful marketing campaign after that, and that could even be the main reason for some of these cars' success.
One of the obvious ones that we'd already talked about for a successful marketing campaign was that Mustang being that first year. They were
Mhm.
known as a relatively mom and pop, like your parents would own a Ford. And so most young people at the time were not interested in following the baby boomers. They had a lot of money to spend, or at least in in comparison to the previous generations that were young at the time. And so there was a huge boom in that. But the other one that comes to mind is actually a print ad. And it kind of changed the whole idea of the automotive print ad because it was just a picture of the Volkswagen Bug in the little right corner and just said, "Think small." And that is held as one of the best automotive ads. And it even made a brief appearance in Mad Men. So, it actually had a influence in history apart from automotive history. Even in sales, they recognized that this was a huge thing in the turning of how the industry is going to go.
Yeah, I think certainly a good sign of success with advertising is when it starts making its way into pop culture references and starts getting talked about outside of just directly car sales. Once it breaks
Mhm.
its way into that, you've ran a pretty successful campaign usually.
Exactly. And like going back to that muscle car era, a lot of the differences between the cars technically were very little. So it really came down to how they were marketing these different vehicles. I know the GTO from Pontiac had come out a little bit later after the Mustang. However, they had marketed as the car for the tiger in you. And that is verbatim, by the way. But it really depends on how the medium between the customer and the buyer, that advertisement, that relationship, that's really what depends on the whole transaction.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Man, the tiger in you, that makes me want an old Pontiac GTO. It's
It's
pretty
like
cool.
at the time, I'm sure that was completely riveting. Now it's like we've heard everything, so it doesn't really hit the same.
Yeah. Yeah, I do feel like when as car specifically, but just marketing in general again, I feel like as early on in the car industry, it didn't take much. Cars were already pretty cool, kind of sign of status. You didn't need to do too much marketing, and if you did have a good marketing campaign like that, people were bought already, hook, line, and sinker. Now
No,
it's much
totally.
more competitive. There's probably hundreds of car models on the market. Several major manufacturers are all competing against each other, so it's certainly more competitive when it comes to marketing and really capturing the attention of your customers.
Absolutely. Their whole idea at the time was just to outplay the other competitors rather than to differentiate, at least in that specific era.
Yeah, and I think that's a good segue into positioning, actually. I mean,
Hmm.
as it gets more and more competitive, positioning becomes more and more important. Really making
Absolutely.
sure you're offering your product in the right place, showing it to who it is. Do you want to give us maybe a brief description of what your understanding of positioning is?
Positioning is, in layman's terms, is basically how the brand or product aligns itself. And within the automotive industry, there's various priorities in customers. So there's obviously thousands of ways to align these brands or products. Some of the more successful, I'd say, would either be competitor based, just due to the competition of it, and it becomes kind of a an iconic thing, like Ford versus Chevy, or Ford versus Ferrari, if you're talking about the race. Another one is just market positioning. When you see a gap in it, it's like, oh, we need to go and attack this. There is a possible idea for creation right here. As we talked about earlier, that's one of your jobs as a marketer. So you really have to be able to identify and act upon those areas in the market.
Yeah, certainly. I think like a good example of market positioning that we've seen recently is not many people think of this, but electric vehicles have been around for quite a while. If you remember those little smart cars, I don't know when they came out, but probably mid 2010 or probably even earlier. I don't know. What's your guess on that?
I know that the first proper Tesla came out in 2012, and it was actually bought, they had bought a company and completely scrapped their chassis, took all of the batteries from it, and put it inside a Lotus Elise. And that became the Tesla Roadster S, and that was the first one that was ever created.
Oh,
So,
really?
right around there is the start of it, per se, but it was nowhere near performance wise where they are today. I mean, it would maybe get 100
Right.
miles. It was not great. It was not a practical car, so many people didn't buy them, but it really sparked the idea of it.
Yeah, it's certainly breaking into a new market. And when I think of, an electric vehicle, I think of Tesla right off the bat. But they didn't pioneer it. They had what I was getting at earlier was that those little two-seater smart cars. It's they're always pretty goofy in my opinion. Didn't see many people driving around. It looked like two strong dudes could probably lift them up and move them down the street if you
Exactly.
wanted to. And nobody took it seriously. And Tesla at the time, certainly not completely original. Didn't come up with the idea of an electric car, but they did come up with the idea of a functional luxury, high performing electric car, not a little tiny thing that would just get crushed by a
Right. And
truck.
they wanted it to be for the consumers, less for just enthusiasts.
Exactly. Yep. And I think they did a great job of positioning themselves. And part of it was, they're the first major one, and it kind of grabbed everybody's attention. It's this exciting new thing, and that's a prime example of market positioning, finding yourself in the right situation at the right time, putting your brand right in the middle of it, and taking full advantage of it.
Mhm. And it's interesting because positioning, I'd argue, at least in the auto industry, is the most important part of this. Apart from identifying the segments, this is where it all happens because this is where the vehicles or the brands start to gain a reputation with throughout history that will carry on to other enthusiasts and consumers throughout. Like one perfect example for me is in the early 90s, Nissan had released the second generation of the GTR Skyline. And at the time, Nissan was a really struggling company. So they had adopted the old NASCAR saying, where if you win on Sunday, you sell on Monday. And so it really backed over this idea that the sales were inspired by their performance on the track. And that was really much the case in earlier times throughout history. And so, going off of that, they had created this vehicle known to enthusiasts later on as Godzilla because it was the beast from Japan. And so, this vehicle, the R32, was the generation. It had won every single race that it had entered in its first year, which had not been done at that time. And that was just due to all of their technological advancements. But since they were kind of a dying company, once everyone saw that they could do that, it boosted them back up significantly. And those cars were flying off the line.
Yeah, certainly. And it's just something about car brands where the name just sticks with you. And more so than a lot of other industries, I feel like another good example is in the 80s and 90s, Japanese automakers, so Honda and Toyota primarily, they gained the reputation for reliable, fuel efficient cars. That reliability they really just stuck with and ran with. And to this day, people are still, when you think of a reliable, just car that's not going to break down on you ever, what do you think of? I think of like a Toyota Corolla, right? Or a
That's
Toyota
why I own a
Camry.
Camry. That's
Yep,
exactly the
exactly.
reason.
And I drive a Tacoma as well,
There
and
you
pretty much
go.
the same reason.
We both got
I got
sucked
rid of
into
my
Toyota
Chevy
Con.
Colorado to go get a Tacoma so it wouldn't break down on me. But
No,
yeah, and that's a
exactly.
reputation that Tacoma specifically, I mean, I think in 2016, they stopped making them in Japan and moved most, if not all, of the Tacoma production to a plant in Mexico.
Mhm.
And they've had noticeably more problems since then. And really, no, they're on par with, Ford or Chevy's
Right.
reliability. Ford makes most of their trucks out of Mexico now, too. And does it really matter? Yeah, in a few years, maybe a decade from now, people will catch on if the quality
Mhm.
just goes to the dumps. But right now, it doesn't matter. It's just burned into most people's minds. Anybody who's aware of cars that Toyota makes reliable cars, and just establishing themselves with that 30, 40 years ago, it let them be successful until 2023 today, which is
No,
it's pretty
absolutely.
impressive. And I think it just highlights the importance of that positioning and really
Yeah.
gaining a spot in the industry.
And going off what you said, because you own a Tacoma, like I was trying to buy a Tacoma, and I know this to be fact. Anything from 1999 to about 2012, 2013, they still hold over three-quarters of their original value, even though any other car in that amount of time should have depreciated well under half. And it's one of the few cars that really hold their value in the market just due to how reliable and how much people love their cars.
Yeah, yeah, it certainly transfers over to I think probably even more so in the secondhand used car sales. Like I was in the market, I bought a used Tacoma, but I had a 2018 Chevy Colorado with, how did I sell it with about 80,000 miles on it.
Oh, so
And
you
I
were
sold it.
already in the smaller truck market.
Yeah, yeah, it fits my needs a little bit better. I don't do a lot of hauling, but I do a lot of off-roading. So the smaller trucks kind of just fit my needs a little bit
Exactly.
better, get into tighter spots. But that 2018 Chevy Colorado, and it was a little bit smaller of an engine, didn't have 4-wheel drive, so that is part of it. But with 80,000 miles on it, I sold for, it was essentially a trade, and I sold it private sale, and I bought a new one private sale, but for the exact same price, within $300 of each other. And the Tacoma is a 2011 with 100. I bought it with, I think, 112,000 miles on it. So that's, I mean, that's a pretty substantial difference. And
It's significant, and the fact that you were still having to pay a relatively high price for over 100,000 mile vehicle really
right,
shows how well they hold their value.
yeah, exactly. And Toyota got me too, because that most people would look at that trade off and like, oh, that's not a very good trade off. Why are you doing that? And I have enough faith in the Toyota brand, especially with those older Toyotas, still made in Japan at the time, that I think that I'm pretty confident that truck is going to outrun my old Chevy. And I had some more features that I was looking for too, but the fact that they were able to sell me on that is pretty convincing, with the
Right.
importance of positioning, again, earning that title for yourself. And it really does stick, I think, more so in cars than really anything else.
I find it so interesting too because Honda especially is really dabbled in various aspects of this positioning because for one they really exemplify the price positioning. Hit them, Nissan and Toyota, they all really compete for a price position standpoint as well. And like I know a brand new Camry back in I want to say 2018 was $23,000, which is still relatively low for a brand new vehicle anytime. I know the cheapest one you can get is a Nissan Kicks for 19,000, and so they really do compete at the price level. But the interesting thing to me is that Honda's also continued with their racing division. So for the last, I want to say 3 4 years now, they have been the sole manufacturer of the engines for Red Bull's F1 team, and so they also get a lot of praise for that. So they have really both ends of the spectrum where they have the low price, high quality vehicles and the high price, extraordinarily performing vehicle that they get all the recognition from as soon as one of the Red Bull guys are winning.
Yeah, yeah, that's certainly a big thing. And I think another thing with Honda too is Honda's kind of worked it's one of those companies that's worked its name into everything. Like you can go buy an ATV, a dirt bike, a snowmobile, full
Totally.
side by side, any of that. Honda makes all of those. And
Even
I'm
boat
sure
engines.
I don't have any stats on this, but I'd reckon that the that's more beneficial to them on like the snowmobile side of things. Because if I drive a Honda and I like it, I'm more likely to buy that Honda snowmobile compared to
Mhm.
some
Because
other
it's going to be a
snowmobile brand.
brand you recognize. Like a lot of the same people who manufactures motorcycles don't manufacture full sized vehicles. So it's definitely going to be more inclined to choose the one you're familiar with.
Yeah, certainly. And it goes both ways too. Even if I'm not into, motorcycles or snowmobiles, I think just seeing it around and seeing that placement of the brand everywhere in pretty much anything with an engine in it Honda makes, that I think subliminally at least has a pretty big impact when I go to buy a car. I'm like, I think Honda might know what they're doing.
No, agreed. And while I said that positioning is probably the most important, I don't want to underplay the segmenting and targeting because without those, it's hard to position anything. You have to find out what you're positioning towards. So just to reiterate there.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think segmenting is certainly part of it, but at the very root of everything, just knowing that target market and sticking to it.
Mm-hmm.
I think a lot of companies too, know their target market right off the bat, but then they kind of go down one rabbit hole or another, or go on one marketing tangent and kind of string it out too far off their baseline target market. And that's where you can end up, costing yourself a lot of money, or just dropping off on that customer interest when you start just reaching into areas that you have no business being. So that target market segmenting for sure, and finding that, and positions really just taking advantage of what you already know
Exactly.
through segmenting and targeting.
Those are
But
essentially your research portion and the positionings where you start executing.
exactly, yeah. And I think once you got all that down, that's kind of broad overview of how to effectively sell
Strategies.
cars to people, and then the tactics is really where we get down into the nitty gritty of it. And in marketing, they like to call it the 7 Ps. So I'll just run through them real quick, and then we'll kind of do a full breakdown of them. But that's 7 Ps are product, place, pricing, promotion, people, and process. So that can each one of those could probably have an hour-long podcast on their own. But we'll give you all a
Absolutely.
quick overview of it. Product is kind of what we've been talking about already. It's just what's actually being offered, and you can go both ways. You know, you can decide who you want your market to be and then design your product around it, or you can design your product and then figure out what kind of people are wanting to buy that product. But I mean, pretty, that's probably the most straightforward of them.
Mhm.
It's, features, customization, branding, packaging, and then positioning, and then obviously the price. Price is kind of its own thing as well. We'll get into that. But um, if I'm selling a motorcycle and Harrison, you want to buy a truck and you have no interest in buying a motorcycle, it doesn't matter how well I market it to you or what the pricing is. If
Absolutely.
you never wanted to buy a motorcycle in the first place, you're probably not going to buy it. And that's kind of the gist of the whole product aspect of the tactics here.
Right. Some specifics for these. So, like as you said, product features, customization, the branding, packaging, and overall positioning and price of these products. Some of the examples that come to mind, at least for me, is the ultra luxury vehicles because it's such a small clientele that they have to have a little bit of everything. I know one of the things for Rolls Royce that made them so popular is that they have suicide doors, but not only that, that they also have umbrellas within the side of the door. So if it starts raining, you just click that button, out pops an umbrella. And originally, people weren't sure of the suicide door option, but they didn't realize that it allows for you to enter the vehicle a lot more easily. So people at that price point and looking for that kind of luxury, those things matter. They don't want just the door to open regularly where they have to wiggle themselves in. They want it to be nice and easy because this is something that they're paying an exorbitant amount.
Right. That's something you wouldn't see on anything other than a $250,000 vehicle, right?
Exactly.
Umbrella in the door. That's yeah. I didn't even know that, and that's just
Their
ridiculous.
customization is some of the most insane I've seen in any of the cars because you can not only choose from their stock of leather to put in in your vehicle, you can choose the colors and everything, but you can go as far as ostrich leather, alligator leather. If you want to bring in a sample of a material, they will make the whole car out of that. It's
Really.
unreal what they're willing to do for you because you're paying such a huge price point.
Yeah, and a company like Lamborghini or Ferrari too, they I really don't see much advertising from them too, and maybe they are advertising just not to people like me because I'm not anywhere close to buying one, but a product like that kind of creates a name for itself, especially in the circles that are wealthy enough to buy or interested
Right.
in something like this.
Well, it's
You
interesting
know,
you bring up Lamborghini specifically because they are known to have never advertised. It's like that was one of their things because the people who know about it already know. The people who are already in the market for it, they don't want advertising because it makes it feel like they're bringing it down to a regular consumer level. Whereas people who are purchasing these cars, they want to be positioned with the ultra elite, the ultra rich, the ultra top level of society.
right? And it's almost like they're not selling to you. You're almost having to pitch to
A
them
little
why you
bit,
own a Lamborghini, right?
absolutely. Well, in Ferrari's nature, they actually have somewhat of a like hierarchical system. Like in order for you to buy a brand new one, you have to own a certain amount of other vehicles that are also Ferraris. Like whether that's it can really be dependent on the amount of vehicles or the types. Like if you have one that's way back when, but it's worth so much money, then they're going to be more likely to sell it to you than if you just have cheaper ones throughout. It's a very interesting hierarchy to it because they're very picky with who they want driving their vehicles.
Yeah, it's almost like a little bit of reverse psychology
It
too to create
is.
scarcity, right?
Yeah,
Like,
exactly. To create scarcity. It's a very weird concept when all of the rest of the industry operates differently.
yeah, it's like we don't even want you to own ours. You gotta
Right.
earn the right to own our vehicles, and it's crazy that works, but it clearly does pretty well, and
Seriously.
interesting to see for sure. But yeah, I think that gives a pretty good overview of product and the marketing tactics.
Totally.
How do you think about moving on to place?
Yeah, so place within the marketing mix here, there's it really encompasses the entire process of taking the vehicle from the manufacturer to the consumer. That entire process is where place comes in. And obviously, when you get to the ultra rich, most people are not involved with any bit of the process until the actual purchase. Whether that's designing the vehicle, that's still maybe a couple months, you know. And so most of the time you're focusing on after sales service within the auto industry, as well as retailer selection, because you want good parts and you want a good service after. I mean, do you have any examples off the top of your head for that one?
Yeah, I think with place, like you were saying, it encompasses the entire from the factory to the street or to the delivery to someone's house when it comes to those higher end cars. But place and the placement of the product is pretty, I think, most obviously seen to the average person by location of car dealerships.
Mm,
We're based out of Phoenix. I don't know where all our listeners from, but I can imagine any major city you'll see similar things. Scottsdale is kind of our high end, wealthy part of town, and there's one street in Scottsdale where you have all the car dealerships lined up. And instead of seeing your normal, Chevy, Ford, GMC, Nissan, all that, you're driving past Porsche, Lamborghini, Bentley, Ferrari. They have every luxury or high performance car dealership company that you can imagine just lined up one after another. It's pretty cool to see all sitting out in the lot. And then you go to more rural parts of Arizona and you see the same Ford dealership that you might see in the city, but instead of having their Focus and every other small car, it's primarily F-150s or F-250s or even bigger, just sitting out on the lot. And that's just knowing your market and getting the product to the place where it's going to sell the best.
no, you're entirely right too, because there's two distinct areas when I'm back in Orange County. If you go towards Tustin, you have the general consumers area. We have GMC and everything all the way to Nissan. Whereas if you go down, there's a single stretch, like you're saying for Scottsdale, there's a single stretch of road along the coastal Laguna, and it will have everything from Ferraris, McLarens, Porsches, Maseratis. It's just all the way through. And then you go into boat sales. So it really sees the type of clientele that's over there, you know,
Yep. It's knowing your target market and putting your product right in front of them pretty much.
as if we can't reiterate enough.
Yeah, right. That's what it really comes down to a lot of the time.
It's
And
when you look at it
pretty
from a big perspective, it's hard not to put it that way, you know. Obviously, when
yeah,
we're breaking it down, it gets the specifics, but it all relates back to the STP.
right. Yeah. I think if you had me break down successful marketing in one sentence, it would be knowing your target market and knowing your target market, understanding how they think and how they act, and building your product to best fit them. Right.
Agreed.
It's really what it all comes down to. And that kind of leads into price too. You got to know your target market with that as well. And
Huge.
with placement, a lot of its geographic areas centered around wealthy areas for higher end cars and economical cars for more average areas of town. But pricing certainly works into that as well. Um, just knowing how to appeal to your customer with price. You're not gonna market a Lamborghini as a budget car, right? That's not what people are
No,
looking for.
no.
They're willing to spend a lot. Same as how you're not gonna you're not going to market your Toyota Camry as high performance. You're just going to you can sell its features, but at the end of the day, your main selling point is going to be it's economical, it's fuel efficient, it's not going to cost you as much as some of these other cars out there. And
Right.
you
And
can
some of
kind of
these,
take advantage of that too with like discounts, promotions, and psychological pricing, value based pricing, bundling. Bundling is something we don't see too much in the in the car industry. It's pretty rare you're buying,
Yeah,
two
you
cars or too many accessories with it. But you will see packages like, whenever I ran into this multiple times, you go car dealership and you see that sticker price on the window, and then you start talking to a salesman, all of a sudden it's, $4,000 or $5,000 more, and they got the upgraded wheels, the tint package, the
the
maintenance
extended
kit,
warranty,
that. Was it?
the extended warranty too. They always try to sell you on that.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. There's always something. So and that tends to be more frustrating than like a selling point for me. But it certainly works for a lot of people. That's why they do it. And I understand it. But
Yeah, and going back to what you're saying for the different types of pricing, for a good example for our listeners here, um, really the value-based pricing is one that's a recurrent theme throughout the automotive industry. Obviously, with price discounts and promotions, obviously we had talked about Toyota Thon earlier or Honda Days, but going back to the value-based pricing, an example that comes to my head initially is the difference in performance versus price. So in 2016, I believe it was, they had Dodge had come out with the Hellcat SRT, which is their biggest V8 they had ever produced, and it was going for a really cheap $61,000 because it had 707 horsepower. Now, to put that in comparison with other vehicles of similar power inside would be a Porsche 911 GT2 RS, not even the regular one, the GT2 RS, which costs an astounding $293,000. And that's the cheapest of those that are in similar power point. The Ferrari 488 Pista, similar power, I think is at 705, and that's at $331,000. Following that, the McLaren 720S, exactly 707 horsepower, $310,000. Even an Aston Martin DBS, the Super Leggera, 700 horsepower, $320,000. So Dodge is offering this much performance at a fraction, and it seriously is a fraction of the price of something that would be similar in performance. And that's one of the biggest value-based pricing examples in recent times, at least.
yeah, that's pretty astonishing when you really compare it side by side with similar horsepower vehicles. But I will say I see a lot more Hellcats driving around on the road than I do
There's a
McLarens
reason. And that's what
or
I'm saying. They
Ferraris.
differentiate their buyers just by the price because everyone wants it to be powerful. But having that price difference is where you really pick out a lot of the audience.
Right. Yeah, the Hellcat's certainly not going to have all the same features. It's not going to have the underdoor umbrella for one thing.
Right.
Like, there's a lot of people that aren't really looking for that. They just want a fast car that's going to be fun to drive, and
It's the
they certainly
definition
found
of cheap
their
power.
pocket in the market for that. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah, now going on to that, the promotion, another huge aspect of the P's of the marketing strategy, or not strategy, tactics, sorry. The tactics for promotion that can be anywhere from advertising, sales promotion, but really the goal of promotion is to bring awareness and overall good perception to the brand or product that you are promoting. Is I think that's pretty much it for promotion. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean that's a good overview of it. Promotion's pretty much where advertising comes in, and that's where you decide you have your set product, and you can make a product seem wildly different in one direction or another, depending on how you decide to promote it and describe it to your people. Like we were talking about with the Corolla, I could sit there and talk about every little feature the Corolla has and make it seem like a luxury car. It's not going to make it into one, but you could
Right.
put that image out there. But the promotion is really where you have to make those fine decisions about what's important, what's your customer looking for in a vehicle, and how can you show them that your vehicle has what they're looking for.
Right.
There's
And it's
plenty of ways to do
interesting.
that.
Oh, sorry. You were saying?
Yeah, there's plenty of ways to do that. Advertising is a big one, but I think what we see here, beyond a lot of other industries, is that one-on-one when you get into a dealership. We talked about this a little bit earlier, but you walk into a dealership, and this happened to me. I was selling my first car ever. It was a little Saturn Aura, not the
Oh,
best car
that's
in the
good.
world. but I was selling that, looking to get a truck, and didn't have a lot of money at the time. I was probably 18, and went into this dealership, and I told him, I was like, "Hey, I'm looking to get a truck. Obviously, it's not going to be anything super fancy. I'm just taking the trade-in value I have for this car plus a few $1,000." And made that very clear to him. Asked him like, "Hey, what trucks you have?" And he's like, "Oh, don't have a lot." He just give me the sales spiel. But then we proceed to go around for probably 30, 40 minutes, and he shows me not a single truck. He's like, "Oh, well, I know you want the truck, but this would be a great fit for you." And he did a good. I mean, I was pretty set in what I wanted, so it didn't work out. But it's a great example of how promotion, you can kind of change people's direction a little bit. Maybe in the right situation, I could make you get a motorcycle when you came in to buy a truck, right?
Totally. And
That's
I feel
that's
like
where that
there's
direct marketing comes in.
I feel like there's also different types of promotion apart from like the discounts and the pricing that we had mentioned earlier with like Honda Days or the Toyotathon, where people within the industry like Dodge will release one-off vehicles or limited edition vehicles. Where going back to that Hellcat we had mentioned earlier, a couple years later they went and decided it didn't have enough power, so they threw seven no, it came out to just under 900 horsepower, and it's unreal. It should not be in that. It's too light of a car to have 900 horsepower essentially, and they offered it for $85,000. 85.
Yeah, that's just crazy.
A Porsche 911 brand new is like 96, and I want to say it gets half of that. It's unreal because I'd even seen videos of people in the UK reviewing this vehicle, and they're like, "How is this legal?" Because even on the slightest turns, they'd start sliding out the side because it was so powerful, and that brought so much attention to Dodge because they had a really like screw it attitude. Why not? And so it brought
Yeah.
people towards it because if they liked that kind of attitude and that promotion, even though it wasn't necessarily advertising, it drummed up so much business for them as people who create cheap power. And that's what a lot of people want in the lower price tiers.
Yeah, they found a need and they met it. And in a case like that, I feel like the promotion almost takes care of itself, right? Like the word
Exactly.
gets out when it really is a one of a kind vehicle in that sense. And sometimes that's all you need, especially cars. Cars really are something that advertise themselves. It's not something you take home and hang up on your wall and nobody sees that you're driving it around every day. Enough people get wind of, the next hot car, and
Mm-hmm.
the word gets out and becomes popular on its own if you do it right a lot of the times.
Exactly. If it's a well-designed car, it'll speak for itself. It almost always does. A great example is the Tucker. It was created back in, gosh, I want to say the late 70s, but it was really one of the first to experiment with all this modern technology within their vehicle. While it didn't drum up all of this business at the time and they actually ended up going bankrupt, it paved the way for all these other manufacturers to see what they'd done because the manufacturers were watching, even if the consumers weren't. So they see all of these innovations, like they had a single headlight that would steer in the direction that your wheel was going so you could see around corners. That was pioneered by this company. Direct fuel injection, seat belts, all of this things that we know to be common nowadays was pioneered by this one company. And while they had gone out, they always live in history because they are one of the first to pioneer them. And that promotion kind of speaks for itself too.
Yeah, certainly. That's really interesting. And obviously, you don't want to be the company that does all the innovation and then doesn't get to capitalize on it. But
Right.
that is one of the dangers of being a first mover, right? Like
Exactly.
it's risky moving into that new market, and consumers either they don't know or they don't care at the time, and you just gotta wait for that to catch on. But
It
it
really
is
had changed a lot of things, and people don't even really know what this vehicle is. So it's one of those things that kind of slipped by the wayside, where the promotion didn't really speak for itself, even though in history it had.
right, exactly. Yep. Yeah, it's any one of these any one of these seven P's here can easily make or break you need at least some aspect of all of them. If you have really strong product and everything's going great, but you have just one tactic that's a total bust, it can be end of your company, which is kind of the case for these guys.
Right. So from there, we'll move on to people. And I think this is a pretty huge factor, at least for car companies, that if they want to market correctly, they need to hire the right people. And I feel like that goes without saying.
Yeah, certainly. And those people, it goes from everything from the CEO of said company all the way down to the janitor even. But for customer interaction, it's predominantly, the salespeople making the sales, making the decisions, selling you on the car. And every single one of those people is vital in the chain.
Mm-hmm.
And if you have a CEO making poor decisions for what products come out or how to treat customers, that'll trickle down all the way. And you could have the best CEO in the world, and if you have salespeople who don't care or are rude or make the car buying experience unenjoyable, it can ruin the whole company. It can take everything down, right?
Absolutely. And I'd argue some of the best creations in automotive history were due to hiring the right people. One example that comes to mind is Carroll Shelby, and his name's become popular because he had created the Shelby Cobra and the GT500 for Ford. And before that, he had actually been a independent manufacturer creating and tuning cars on his side, but he'd also been a race car driver for Le Mans, and he would race in that 24-hour race in, I want to say, the early 50s. And so once they had gotten wind of that, they hired him to create their pinnacle, it could be argued at least, the Ford GT. So the GT40 was created to beat Ferrari in the Le Mans race because they had been known as the dominant force in the race. And so going back to that old motto I'd said that whatever wins on Sunday sells on Monday. In that same fashion, they went and created one of the best vehicles to have been created, and overall show that not one company will have a dominance if a person can influence the direction of the company and change some things like that. So hiring the right people and people who want to be a part of that industry, I feel is very huge for productivity and marketing as well.
Yeah, and if you're a car enthusiast, that's a huge selling point, right? But I would argue that even trickles down to anybody that's heard of it. Like you hear these
Agreed.
major innovations like that, you're like, I'm a little bit more likely to think about buying Ford next time I'm in the market for a car, even if
Right.
it's not something I'm consciously thinking about. Just having that name in the back of my head and knowing the reputation they have it can move mountains when it comes to making sales.
And it's funny because they haven't been in racing really consistently since. And so for this coming F1 season, they're now the manufacturers for the Red Bull team instead of Honda to try and get back in it because their company's kind of slidden by the wayside. They haven't really made too many exciting vehicles lately, at least that have really built up the company. They might have little bumps in the road here that have brought them up, but overall, it's been pretty plateaued. And so they're hoping that a move like this will get them back up.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And I think it's a good move for them, especially for people who are involved with F1 and racing in general. It's a huge thing, and hopefully it works out well for them. I like what they're doing. I think we got the top of the line covered. People on the sales floor, I think, are also important too. And I actually just thought of a funny family example. So two of my two aunts, they're older ladies, and they for years and years, Saturn since gone out of business, but they would buy Saturn cars only. And Saturn never had a great reputation, not putting out any fancy cars. It's just kind of your
It's
run of the
Saturn.
mill,
Yeah.
whatever. Yeah, it's just a car,
It's
right?
a
Nothing
Saturn,
fancy.
right?
Yeah, and exactly. Yeah. And one day I sat them down and I was like, what's with the Saturns? Like why are you guys so enthusiastic about this company? And it was one thing, and it came down to people. And their company policy was, instead of walking into a car dealership and sitting in that back and forth haggling for price, they had a no haggle policy where the sticker price is sticker
Interesting.
price, no add-ons, no discounts. And I don't know, but they could have even been paying more than they
Right.
would have been if they walked into a normal dealership. But they were totally fine with that because they didn't want to deal with the hassle, they thought it made the car buying experience unenjoyable and frustrating at times. And it's definitely predatory at times too. With they're certainly taking advantage of people who aren't knowledgeable about cars and
Right.
getting a few extra thousand off of them, or a few hundred even, just because they think they can. And they recognize that, my aunts, and they understood that, and Saturn was it for them. That's all it took, just
That's
a strong
interesting.
policy with that.
Yeah.
Instead of dealing with that kind of sleazy car salesman stereotype, they were dealing with a professional guy that was really nothing more than a cashier, just
Yeah.
showing up the car and checking them
Yeah,
out with it.
exactly. He's a bougie cashier.
Exactly. Yep.
And that really
Yeah.
ties into the customer service part of people. Like, while there's people who prefer to feel like they're making a difference in price at these dealerships, there's also people who are like, I want the customer service that doesn't bother me at all. And I feel like that's a really interesting point within the industry, because most people go with that traditional sales model versus that Saturn's one. So I'm curious. Obviously, Saturn's no longer in business, so I'm curious if that had something to do with it. But also, why is it that they prefer that traditional sales model, even though somebody had done something else that people obviously preferred?
Right. I think it's a very fine line too. Like I personally, if I walked into a car dealership and say I didn't know Saturn's policy, they just told me, yeah, we have no room to move on price when I'm spending thousands and thousands of dollars on a vehicle, that would kind of be a turn off to me. I want to be able to
It's a
sit
fair
down,
point.
yeah. So with any purchase that big, and you see it with, cars, boats, anything that's going to cost you tens of thousands,
Yeah,
there's always a little bit of room for negotiation because they want the sale just as much as you want to buy. But with that being said, I want some flexibility. I want to be able to haggle, but it is a huge
right.
turn off when you show up and you do get that stereotypical kind of sleazy used car salesman
Mm,
who, like in my Chevy dealership instance, you walk in saying you want one thing, and the guy, it's a through one ear out the other, and he's
exactly.
showing you cars you're not even interested in. So I have very little patience for that too. So
Yeah.
fine line with these companies, but they've been around long enough where you can gauge public interest in each type of selling and kind of pursue that as you will.
And it's interesting because your story also kind of relates to our next point here, process. So the process for buying a vehicle, as you're mentioning, it's completely different than what people want sometimes. And so the ordering process, as mentioned in one of the breakdowns of what process could be, and as well as the user experience process, are two of the key points within a dealership that like really make the decision. Because as you're saying, if someone's saying, oh, we can't move on price, even though that might be lower, that might be higher, some people had preferred that, but you want to feel like you have a difference in say in the price, even if that might end up being the same. That flexibility offers you that sense of, all right, we're kind of hashing this out, you see me eye to eye sort of feeling.
Yeah, I think if I walked in, and this is pretty dumb to say, but if I walked into one dealership and they said car's 18,000 final offer and just were unwilling to budge, and I walked in for same or similar car at another dealership and it was 20,000 and I was able to get them down to 18, I
Hmm.
would I'd almost be more willing to do that. Like sure it is a
That's what
hassle, but you feel
exactly.
kind of
That's what I'm saying.
accomplished
It's
too, and
the
you feel like you're
perceived
working with
idea that you're actually changing the price versus the physical reality where it might just be the same.
right. Yeah, I spent the same amount of money, but I felt like I got more value for my dollar
Right.
because I saved it for 2000. And whether that's true or not, it doesn't really matter. It's really just comes down to customer perception.
Yeah, process is an interesting thing because it could be defined as so many things, whether that's like the creation or manufacturing process. But obviously, most people in who are buying a car or part of the auto industry will not be a part of the creation or manufacturing process. That's a very small group of people within the whole spectrum. So the ordering, the customer service, and the user experience process are really the three areas of process that is most impactful within this industry.
Yes, certainly. With your average everyday car sale, it's yeah, customer service, user experience, and post purchase. I think the only exception really is when you start getting into those luxury cars again. Like I think Rolls Royce, if I remember correctly, the average turnaround time from ordering, from first talking to a Rolls Royce representative to actually receiving the car averages about 2 years, which
Oh my
is
gosh.
yeah, which is crazy. but they
Right.
don't. Rolls-Royce doesn't build cars and put them on a lot and sell them to you.
Right.
They talk to you. You get everything you want, custom installed, and the process of building and assembling the car doesn't start until you've already purchased it. Which
Right.
for a lot of people, it's a huge turnoff. But generally, those buying a Rolls Royce, it's not their only car, and they need a daily driver, right? That's
Exactly. And they've kind of got money to burn too.
Yeah, exactly. So it's again catering to your target market with the process, like anything else. But that's kind of an interesting thing to me because I know if I walked into the Toyota dealership and they told me 2 years, I would
Yeah.
turn around and probably laugh in their face, right?
Well, I mean,
But
I think it's also going back to like the options of the actual vehicles themselves. It's like you recognize that a Toyota or a Honda, what could you possibly be doing for 2 years? Whereas, for a Rolls Royce, like they ask you what kind of leather you want. So everything is built to your spec, everything about it. So it makes sense why it's 2 years, but still, that is so freaking long. That is a crazy amount of time
yeah,
to
that is
like that.
outrageous to me. But yeah, it's pretty crazy to think about. I think where the average person runs into process more though is generally customer service, which we already touched on, the actual car buying experience, and then a real common one too, especially nowadays, is the post purchase process with like warranty, maintenance
Mhm.
plans, and that's a pretty important thing too. And you can kind of I feel like I see this a lot. My parents are actually guilty of this multiple times where you have that maintenance plan, and
Yeah.
instead of going to the shop down the road to get your oil change, you take it into the dealership, and then next thing you know, you're sitting around for an hour or two waiting for your oil to get changed, and then that car salesman comes out and he's like, "Well, this car is real nice. It's only 2, 3 years old. You don't have a
Right.
reason to get it. You weren't even thinking about it until now, but for an extra 5 grand, we can put you in a brand new one today." And that's that's pretty crazy. Somebody like
Yeah,
a purchase that big and just being able to convince somebody on the fly. But I think that's kind of worked into their process too. And I
agreed.
know again multiple people that have fallen victim to that.
And there's also different types of like per post purchase processes. Like I know if you are to buy a 911 from Porsche, they also send you it's like a silhouette of the model of your car in the same color from their factory. So it has the exact same paint and bodywork that you have on your actual car. And so it's kind of one of those little like mementos. It doesn't mean anything, it doesn't cost you anything, but it kind of keeps that image of Porsche being one of those like thoughtful and thorough brands, even though it's not high luxury, it's not low, it's right in the middle point of the price range. And so giving that little extra during that process really means a lot to some people.
Yeah, it makes the buyer feel like the company actually cares about them a little bit
Exactly.
instead of just being another number in the books. And I think that's important for a lot of companies too. Like sometimes it's those little things that really don't cost much in the grand scheme of things, but it gives people that little extra impression that you're
Mhm.
really doing a little bit more than everybody else.
Right. And I guess that kind of leads us into physical evidence as well. So
Yeah,
you want to take
yeah,
that?
physical evidence is very important one, but also I think pretty straightforward, but it does cover a lot. When I think of physical evidence, I think of the dealership itself, right? But there's a lot that goes into that. There's, the area that it's in, the parking lot, but overall, physical evidence is the the process of buying a car is very much a service, right? You're dealing with a lot of people. You get a product at the end, but there's a lot of service that goes into getting that final product. It's not going through the drive-through at McDonald's, right? And physical evidence is, as it explains, just the actual brick and mortar store, the concrete things that you can see that make you feel like you're making the right decision, which is with this purchase. So it
Totally.
goes from the car itself to the dealership to the neighborhood that it's in, the the food or drinks that they're offering you while you're waiting, how nice the offices are, pretty much everything like that.
Absolutely. And that can even be part of their attire. If they're not dressed properly, you're not going to want to buy a car from them, you know? You want them to
Right.
also look the part, and that goes into the physical evidence as well.
Yeah.
Also tying in
Yeah.
what you
I've never been in a Lamborghini dealership, but I would imagine if I walked into one, all of the salesmen would be wearing probably designer suits and everything.
Right.
First, when you go to the used car dealership down the road, it's the guy's a little sloppier. He might not have
Yeah,
shaved in a couple days, greasy hair, you know, maybe just a polo instead of a suit, all that. And it's those
exactly.
little things that I do think make a big difference.
Yeah, and I'd even say like the customer testimonials, like you were saying earlier, the actual, because obviously you can only perceive so much from your interaction, but any interaction can be different from anybody else. So saying all of this testimonial from other buyers will also help like affect that decision. Even if it's like pre-owned, if everyone's saying this is a great place, then you can kind of put the looks of it to the side. Whereas if you are going in there completely blind, that might be one of the first things you recognize.
Yeah, it might be a bit of a turn off. Exactly.
Exactly.
Yeah, I think like what else? Like when I was on that my last car shopping experience, I walked into a Ford dealership, and Ford carries every type of car you could imagine, pretty much. And but when I walked in, they had a big like rock decal or prop with little like desert outdoor setting, and then it was a Ford Raptor, top of the line, all the bells and whistles. I looked at the price tag. I think it was like $120,000
Yeah,
truck.
those things are crazy.
Yeah, beautiful trucks, but well out of my price range. And I certainly wasn't thinking about buying that, but just walking in, it was like, okay, they have a bit of an emphasis. Even though I know exactly what they're offering already, that just kind of put subconsciously in the back of my mind, like, oh, they care about off-road vehicles or they care about trucks.
Mhm.
Even though there's a million Ford Focuses sitting out in the lot too,
Right.
that that little thing kind of capture one aspect of the customer base and the target market they're looking for, and made them feel a little bit more welcome and a little bit more important, right?
Totally. And it's interesting you bring up the Raptor because the way that was promoted, honestly, was by a competition. So there's a Baja race that happens every year, and people make all of these trophy trucks and super modified ones. And so a stock truck has never once completed it. And so they had purpose built this thing to be able to withstand that race. And it was the first OEM car to have finished it. And so that
Really?
really had spiked up the whole hype for it. It's like, okay, this thing can hold its own. And that
Yeah.
also, like, while it's promotion, I feel like that also could be part of physical evidence because you've seen it prove itself.
Yeah, yeah, certainly. Yeah, it's kind of that blend of a lot of these do blend together in a way. Like
Exactly.
it's
It's hard to
certainly
really
promotion, but
differentiate
it is
them.
physical evidence. It's undeniable proof that the truck can do what they're claiming it can do. That's cool to see. But
Yeah.
yeah, I didn't know that. That's the only OEM truck to
The
finish the
only
Baja.
one.
Wow,
And
that's
like the
crazy.
Baja is a legit race. So like saying that it's like, okay, that's got some merit to it.
Yeah, yeah, that's a brutal race. I've watched a few videos of that. It's
Yeah.
some cool stuff. But yeah, those Raptors are beautiful trucks too. But it's crazy how they're going from trucks historically. I feel like have just been the workhorse of cars. You want them for what they're capable of, not for how they look or the luxury.
Mhm.
But a lot of these newer trucks, and especially if you're getting those higher end
Yep.
trims like the Raptor, it's full leather seats, every bell and whistle, big 18-inch screen in the
Oh
middle,
yeah. It's
everything you could ask
absolutely
for in a luxury car, and just put into a different body style.
yeah.
It's cool to see.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's absolutely insane. But I think that's about it for this episode. Do you
Yeah,
have
hopefully
anything
this
else
gives
to
people a
add
little bit
to?
of a better idea of what they're looking for when they go to buy a car, and a better understanding of the marketing forces working, I don't know, for or against you. But
Exactly. You kind of have
see.
a better way to relate to something that you guys will actually understand since you're gearheads as well. You'll understand what we're saying and relating this to the marketing. So hopefully this gives you a little more insight and thanks for listening in.
Yeah, thanks for listening. Have a good one, guys.
All right. Good night.